from Julie and at least,
Yes.
Is this a printout yet?
Yeah.
Oh.
this is some,
That's so helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you. for
there's a lot of
sharing that.
information
Thank you.
in them. Julie has done,
An amazing job.
an amazing job. She's probably done 90% of the research. And I would say, well, I would say Mary Ann's done a lot of the research too, so I can't.
Oh, a little bit, not a lot.
Julie really,
Yes, but you have yours from experience.
so you know what, why don't we'll start, so I will take roll call.
So this is what was handed out though by mask when they came?
No.
This is-
No, let me start the meeting and then we can discuss. All right, take it by roll call. Dr. McKenzie,
Here.
Ms. Sonnenborn, Mr. Brand,
Present.
Mr. Laurel,
Here.
Ms. McDonough.
Yes.
Is anyone here for public speak? Seeing none, we will start. So today's meeting is to, I would like to say, finish the discussion on the process of the superintendent search. I think what Julie and I have been finding out by our research is that there's a lot of school districts who are looking for a superintendent this year, and a few of them have already started the process and have very aggressive timelines to finish the search. What we've been seeing and hearing a lot of is it's a pretty, I'm trying to think of the word, aggressive year for a superintendent search. There's a lot of competition. So what we've decided, what we've done, or what Julie has done, I don't say we, Julie has really put together a comprehensive look at what are the different ways we can search for a superintendent. She's even put together timelines of what those, what they would look like, and we can start from there. Tonight I just want to focus on the search. I know there was some talk about let's focus on a job description as well to form our own. I think because of the time crunch we're under, we'll do that at another time. Tonight really should be reserved for the search and how we're going to start that process.
I guess.
Okay, but we will come back to
Yes,
it.
yes, but I just, from doing our research, we just feel like we can do that while we're getting the process started. We have, I know Julie handed out, emailed everyone. We do have some sample superintendent job descriptions from different towns, from Mass, I have one. This is just internal. Oh, do you have the,
It's two things.
two different.
Everyone gets two.
So does everyone have something that says external, internal?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't have that. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Can I have one? Which one do you need? Both.
I can give it to someone. Does someone need an internal? Because Julie, I have everything on my
Okay, great.
computer. Oh, okay. Does anyone need an internal timeline? Julie, did you need it?
No, I got it.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So, I'm trying to, let me just pull up. So I can pull up.
While you're doing that, can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
In terms of the difference in timelines, one says 1/7 selection, one says 12/10 appointment.
Yeah. Right, so I guess the assumption, and I wouldn't read too much into the language, because this was more for the dates, I think, to try to sketch out, based on information that MASC provided and information that I've gotten from like looking at other, news articles on superintendent searches, this was kind of an aggressive timeline for trying to get it done this fall, right? Which is what some other districts are doing.
Yes.
And so we don't have anyone on board to help us with that yet. So this would be trying to get that process moving. So I think the internal is really more of like embedding, our current interim superintendent and having this internal process whereby which we get community feedback, and the external is more about hiring a consultant and doing a full search as we've, talked about, so I feel like there's two options.
So,
What do you think?
with 15 years' experience in search, this is more than just aggressive.
Yeah.
We know
This
that.
is-
Well, Paul, what we did is
Right,
what we're finding,
right.
through Julie and,
I was
Julie-
sort of trying to point that out, right, too, that like, it is hard and it's a lot to do, right, in a short amount of time, and, one could argue.
Just from experience, a lot of, with Projects in Love, which is probably one of the leading firms that does academic and nonprofit leadership searches. And firms like that would look at this and say, if you're looking to do this by 1/7 or 12/10, they walk away.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
it's-
I can,
well,
Virtually.
what we're finding, Paul, I
Yeah.
think why Julie started with those dates is that we are finding a lot of districts, if you look at what their timeline is that date. So if we, through our discussion, if we decide we are going to go with an external search, we will lose candidate. There is potential that I won't say we lose candidates, but maybe potential candidates that we would want to draw from to come to Natick to interview. We're not gonna have a chance to meet those candidates, and we're gonna be left with what's left. And there's probably about 5 or 6 districts that I can think of, that I've done research that have a December date. We're not trying to push it or rush it. I think Julie was just trying to put it in a process.
Yeah,
We're not
no,
glued to
I
this.
understand, I just know from experience that, A, this is very aggressive.
Yeah, we
and
talked
B,
about that.
But in terms of, whether a candidate opts to stay in a search in this town versus go and be in the pool in another town, depending on where they rank, would be just as much a deterrent as to where you start pulling candidates from.
Can I just answer a quick question?
Sure.
How many, approximately, how many districts do you think are looking for superintendent? And what are some of the districts that you would think we would be competing with
I know
in
it's
external
7.
search? 7?
7, Northborough, Westborough, I'm gonna pronounce wrong, Massacomet, Masconomet, okay. And I have Northborough, Westborough,
I think Hingham is looking.
Hingham, yeah.
It's a little too early to have a complete listing though.
No, but there's some, I think there are some that have announced their retirement, so I'm trying to look it up.
It's greater than one.
Yes.
Is it Northborough, Southborough, or just Northborough?
Northborough and Westborough.
I think it's both.
It's regional.
It's
It's
not
not
regional.
regional.
Then it's Northborough, Southborough.
I think that's it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull it up. And I heard of one more, well, we have it here. Back on it, let me see if I can find it. I'm sorry, if anyone has another question, or Julie, do you wanna just while I'm looking?
Well,
Kind of
so
talk
I
about your
think
thoughts.
let me just walk through the materials. It was some, I felt like the information from MASC was helpful in, looking for, the document, looking for a leader and a guide, and sort of what the questions you should be asking yourself, and, what you have in your district, how you prepare for a search. So I don't know if anyone had any, there's just, for me, there were a lot of steps that need to be answered, a lot of materials that need to be prepared, to do this, right? And then, I felt like the, key decisions, you can see, MASC helps a lot of school committees, whether they are, through a formal process or as part of a dues paying organization. We are also, we also have access to some of their services because we are a member of MASC. So, this particular one, they're helping
Oh, so yeah, there's, I can list who's, I'm on the Mass
Yeah.
website, and, Stoughton is, which that was the other one.
Are they really?
Uh-huh. Hingham. Let's see, I'm just looking at the points. It says, other. Yeah, and the other, other school district opportunities, but they don't list. Yeah, so those are some other ones that are. So that's 6 or 7 that we know of as of right now, not including Natick.
With a handful of them being approximately located to us.
Yeah,
And there'll be a number of others that appear by March.
I'm sure they will be. I'm sure some superintendents are thinking of retiring. I don't know, Marion, what would you say?
I don't know how that might, soon to retire superintendent.
But what's a typical time that you see it really pick up in terms of people? Like, I'm not sure, I feel like this is still early to know the pool, but.
Honestly, I haven't, 10 years ago, we hired a superintendent. I honestly don't know. I haven't been.
Gotta keep your eye on that job market for a while, right?
Right.
Julie, that mass document said the pool was slim. Did you get any feedback or any comments on that when you were pulling this really good
Yeah,
information together for us?
I mean, I think we've all kind of seen that and, what MAS, and I talked to Glenn the other day when I was getting this information and, he has some insight on the pool that's out there, right? And the number of people applying, I think we've all seen the articles and MASS and MASC have told us, that it's a tougher and tougher job with the political nature of it, so it becomes more challenging. And now, they've told us about those training programs they have specifically to address the shortage, so. They didn't have any sort of, I asked about like any sort of research or studies on the shortage of superintendents. They sort of know that anecdotally, and I think there's been, some information. They sort of said they answer that on a, year by year basis, but overall, there's not as many candidates who want the job.
I don't think the information has changed since they've come and spoken to us at that time. The other thing that definitely found, because of the way our retirement is in Massachusetts, we're not gonna get someone from out of state. It's really highly unlikely. It would have to be someone who's relocating here because of a totally different reason, not because they're looking for research, because Massachusetts does not honor the other years that they put into service. So no one's gonna give up their retirement to come here.
There's no reciprocity
No.
anymore.
You have a question?
No, any thoughts?
Okay.
Well, I think the sort of decision we have to make, we decided to do a search when we had our July meeting. And, we talked to MASS and MASC in June before that. So, and I'm sure a lot of us have talked to people, in Natick since then and gotten feedback. We've had feedback sent to school committee and, so I think what we have to decide now, based on all this information and what it looks like to do a search, is do we want to go forward with an external search and recruit outside candidates, or do we want to get community feedback on our current interim superintendent? And do a sort of an internal vetting, which Glenn, MASC and Glenn have talked to us about, and that's, I remember when he came and presented, he talked about, I was gonna say where the Patriots play, Foxborough. Foxborough did a sort of that, and they found that the community was pretty happy with the direction the schools were going and the person they had in place, and I don't know what kind of outreach they did to staff and faculty. That would be something that would be important to me. But so I kind of think those are our
really our two options.
Our two options, and based on what we know and what the
Are they
community
mutually
feels.
exclusive though? Can they not be done at the same time?
No,
They can't.
it would cost us,
Why is that?
because we pay double for a search.
Well, what do you mean by that?
Well, if we're doing an internal vetting, that's our time and our effort.
No, we would hire a consultant to do it. We wouldn't do the focus groups.
There was a mass document that had a price, like, how they help.
Yeah,
That's not your.
right,
I have, so I have it.
Yeah.
So
I sent- we sent it
I
out, I
saw
just-
it, and
yeah.
it was pretty helpful, and part of it
Yeah.
said, like, the fees associated with, Mass will conduct the focus groups and do everything like that. I think there was a price associated with it,
9,500.
like, plus expenses or something.
Right, so I've added up what the expenses would be, and they would come to about close to, I would say, between 15 and 20,000.
I don't know if that's, if you
For
factor
fo-
that
Focus groups.
For-
with
internal,
the
like,
expenses and the.
what does that mean?
Well, we probably wouldn't need
Surveys.
some of the expenses if we didn't, if you're talking internal, I think we're looking about 9,500. Because the other expenses came from, like, they would charge us for the advertising,
Right.
charges for the marketing materials,
Mailings.
so I would, let's say $10,000 to
And
run.
I guess, so my question was, is that factored into the internal schedule? Like, I don't know what the ramp up time, if we, like, so to Paul's point, was, if we went through that process internally, and I'm just devil's advocate for a moment, if we went through that process internally and didn't like the outcome of it, how much time would that take to get to that outcome and then still have time to do an external, if we didn't like the outcome, you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
So maybe to answer that in a little bit of a different way, it seems like we have one of two choices that are practical in terms of timeline. Seems like we either do an internal vetting, in which case if that doesn't mean that Anna is appointed as superintendent, that we, it almost kind of really disqualifies her, I would imagine, just from her perspective of them being part of an external search of, you told me, no, we're not now, right now, so let me go ahead and find something else. Or the timeline of doing an external one may be so short that we are setting the time to appoint a new superintendent, whether it be an internal candidate that's part of that search or an external candidate that we find through a search process, that is kind of sets us back on timeline-wise a year. So that seems to me the two, separate from the individuals that are part of the process, those seem to be the two processes that seem to bear out. Perhaps it's too late now in the year to do an external search with a search agency and still meet this timeline, you know, you saying it's beyond aggressive.
Paul?
I mean, realistically, these are self-imposed dates.
Right,
When I talk to a client, you basically say, you wanna get the right candidate. The dates should not drive what you're looking for, because basically, you're putting a term limit on saying, we gotta find the ideal thing in a short period of time. My point of doing an internal vetting at the same time in which you put out an ad or in the various places and take a look at the candidate pool and compare it with what you've got. You don't have to necessarily go through the entire iterative process of interviewing everybody. You'll get a good idea of whether your pool is deep enough to either compare favorably or disfavorably to the interim. The interim is there until we change that title. We can wait a year. We don't have to do it by 12/10. That's a self-imposed deadline. And if you want to get the right candidate, be it the internal, or an external, you let the process drive the results, not the date.
I agree the dates could be kind of arbitrary, but I think everybody knows kind of how I feel. And there's part of me that feels we also have a justice issue. We have an internal candidate who spent 16 years in the district, and she deserves a heads up or a heads down. And some of those school districts are frankly better than the Natick School District. Northborough, Southborough, for example, is ranked among the top 10, and some of the ones that you mentioned are. So that's really steep competition, and we could lose our internal candidate, and I don't know if that's a problem. I mean, we could go through the internal candidate and vote her down and then move on, but it would involve probably adjusting the dates. We wouldn't be appointing a superintendent in January, we'd probably do it in March, maybe we could do it in March or April.
I think another issue that, you know, I think we're all, I think we also have to look at it as, what is the best for our district? That's the only, this is the most important job we have to do
Right.
as school committees. And most school committees don't even get a chance to do this, lucky them. So I think we really need to think about what is best. And I think it's very different ways to look at it. do we do a search and see if there's anything better than what we have? Or do we feel I feel like if we're gonna do an internal search, then we have to say, we really believe in our superintendent. It's not to rule Anna out, it has to be to rule her in. Because if we're gonna rule her out, then we just do an external search. But if people are leaning towards doing an internal search, we have to do it collaboratively and feel like we really, as school committee, are behind this candidate, and we're gonna let the public also have their say. I mean, we've all been getting feedback from the public. We want feedback from the public, we want feedback from the faculty and the staff. But ultimately, it's for us to synthesize that information and decide what's best. So I would say this, the way I look at it is, if we're behind Anna, then we do an internal search. I'm not saying 100% we're hiring her, but we can't start with an internal search saying we're doing it to rule you out.
I feel like given the evaluation we gave her, the feedback we've gotten from numerous people, and I feel like the series of ways that she's proven herself between March, January, whenever, and now, I can't imagine that wouldn't be our next logical step. I can't think of any reason we wouldn't do that, given the strength and given the evaluation that we gave her.
And Julie, and I'm not trying to put a finger on the button, that finger on the scale, but I know even your conversation with Glenn, people know we have to be very methodical in what we do and how we do it, because Anna has a reputation out there, an excellent reputation. She's our internal, people know she's our intern. Everyone who, there's buzz that she's here. This is who people are gonna compete with. So that's what I'm saying, we really just need to be as methodical as we can. Paul?
If that's the will of the committee, that's fine. However, I do want to remind the committee that in January, we took a public vote to take a search process. That was reaffirmed a couple of months ago. We have got to make sure that the rationalization why we're not going to give the community that is front and center.
We are still searching. We're not doing a
Internal assessment
search.
is not a search.
Yes,
Internal
it is a
search,
search.
it is.
It is a search.
There's a whole process.
It'll have community meetings, it'll have the opportunity for input. It is a search.
Do you agree with that that's a search?
So I had a procedural question along the same lines where we did take that vote in July that we would do a search. And I remember at that meeting, there was a motion made to do an internal vetting, which didn't carry.
Yeah, that was.
So I think to Paul's point, we have to be able to articulate what's changed since then compared to now, because it's not as if we have done a lot of intensive work and analysis that would align with many of these things that have said, this just doesn't seem like our process. So I think I'm open to hearing people's thoughts on that, but I think your point's a good one, that one thing you have to do as a board, you have to take incremental decisions, regroup where you're at, and then figure out what the next step is to an end. And it seems like this is a step to the side from the voted position that we took in July. Because
But in fairness,
Oh, no, wait,
I
can I
raised.
just ask you?
No, wait.
I just need to get clarity on Paul's, you mean the vote we took in March to appoint Anna as the interim?
No, we didn't.
No, in January.
July, in July, not July.
When
We start,
I'll go back through the minutes, but my recollection is that when we used over the winter, this board made a public disclosure that we would not able to serve the superintendent.
In July or in?
No, it was January, February.
no, it wasn't, it was after we appointed
yeah,
Anna,
it would have happened to be after March, because that's when we appointed.
appointed Anna.
I remember that vote. And
It does
I,
feel like it could have been
and
forever.
I-
It does feel like it could have been forever. It could have been much
I
longer.
remember
I just
that
wanted
Everything's
vote
cold out.
I just
because
wanted,
I had put a motion that we vet Anna first and it lost.
yeah.
I remember that vote, and I remember specifically asking, because the language of that motion did not say that we would do an external search, it just said search. And an internal search is a search.
Okay, but you know what, I think we're getting. Yeah, I think, okay, let's just all take a step back. I think we first have to figure out what is the will of what we wanna do. What is people saying, why are people, like, someone, let's just, we're getting caught up in external, internal, we're gonna do a search. We're still going to, the public wanna the real issue is what I'm hearing is people wanna feel that they're included. So that's still gonna happen. The same steps are gonna happen as in external search, except we're vetting one candidate instead of 2 or 3. So let's take that off the table. We as a committee have to decide what we want to do, how we wanna do this search. Julie?
So the only thing that I would say is that in terms of the internal, I don't think it's an internal search because we are not searching beyond Anna. And there may be other people, for all we know, in the Natick Public Schools who would like to be superintendent, right?
I think there is.
So that would be an internal search, I think. That would be a search, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't think that's what we're doing. And I think with MASC's guidance, they would probably call it a vetting an internal candidate, which they talk a lot about in their documents about you need to look internally. A lot of school districts are, like to look at people who've been in the district, who have strong records. That's one of their things that they say the school committee should look at when they're thinking about their next superintendent. So I do think it's either an internal, it's a vetting of whether we have the right person in place right now, and I feel strongly we should find out if we have the right place we know a lot, right? But I would wanna hear from the community and the faculty and staff. And then the other option is more of the external search where we would hire a consultant on this very ambitious time. And then we would count several consultants out because they could never do this. So I think that is where we would hire. I do think MASC would help us with a vetting without any, just as part of our membership, because they've made it very clear that they would work with us if that's.
I'm pulling that up right now.
Yeah, I think their document, sort of lays out their prices if they're applying to be a consultant. But if they're just doing this internal vetting, they've already, they have lists of questions, they have, the ability to staff focus groups, so that's my.
One of the questions I had about the cost for mailing, I personally would not want to bring in an external constituency to do an internal mailing to our community. We have the addresses, we have, the only cost would be actually putting the piece of paper in the envelope and sending it.
It wouldn't be to our community, they're talking about mailing out our marketing materials to people, candidates who are interested.
Right.
It's not to our community, it's to,
Are you talking about the search?
Search.
Somebody mentioned that they were gonna do focus groups and send out.
no, you're.
Two separate things.
Two separate things.
Okay.
No,
Both part of
No.
they're all part of the services that Mass offers as part of
They have a separating comma, not a,
Not,
not an extinguishatory comma.
Yes, Mr. Pompey.
But I agree that, it would be important to share where we were in March and the advice we've gotten. I mean, it sticks with me, and since, when we did that in March, as I said in March, I believed that appointing an internal interim sort of weighted us toward choosing that internal interim, because the advice I had gotten from up until that point and the feedback was that when you do that, you limit your pool of candidates who want to apply, because if that person wants the job, then they're working toward getting that job, and who could blame them? So that was why I had voted at the time to appoint an external interim, so that we could do a search. And since then, I still believe that, because I think, and, I continue to get that feedback. So, and I think we've also, had Anna in place now for several months, and we have that to look at, right? And that would be something an external interim would not have, but if we're thinking about appointing her, we now have a body of work to look at, and we have, because we're required to do so, the evaluation, so that would have to be explained. I agree.
Well, you know, whatever the will of the committee is the will of the committee. Let me just say that on Monday, we're gonna be conducting in public an evaluation that's exemplary. There's nothing on there that's less than exemplary. So I am saying if people are feeling very strongly about vetting an internal candidate, we have some traction behind that, if people choose to go that way. I think the other thing that becomes a reality, and that we are going to have to defend no matter what we do, is why we're spending money on it. Whether we do external or internal, I'm not talking about the candidate we have there. We're gonna have to back that up of why we're spending this money, and I think it's very easy to say that it's our job to do what's best for the district and spending this money, but there's a lot of, we're coming into it, I can tell you, the talk out there, people know it's an extremely tight budget year. So we're gonna have to do a lot of really making sure we have a very clear, concise message that we send out, no matter which way what we do. Dave?
And to your point, justifying the value of whatever we spend money on. We
Yes.
feel like the answer of this
Yeah.
investment helps us because of this and would be a trade-off. Yeah, I think very similarly. I do think that, at least as me as an individual, and we voted this past July, in my mind, it was more the external process than an internal process being called a search, because if you have something you're looking at, I call that a vetting or an evaluation or something like that. But we didn't say an external search, so.
We did not. I'm gonna pull up the minutes, and I think that will help us. I think if we're getting caught on that, then we should have the,
From July or March?
I think the minutes will
I don't
reflect
think
one
we-
thing.
I don't think we need the minutes.
No, I don't feel
well,
like
I think if
I'm,
we're getting stuck on
I don't
that.
feel like I'm caught on it, and the will of the committee will be the will of the committee. And I agree with what Julie just said, but I didn't vote the same way that she voted. But I knew full well, and I knew that you were right, if we appointed her as an interim superintendent, then in effect, we were gonna not get candidates that were as good. And I've, in fact, heard that, and the experience of doing her evaluation, and we've had time, and there were, what else do we want except exceptional and extraordinary? And we have that. We have somebody who also has a doctorate in education, who's teaching other people who are in the loop to be superintendents. Natick has been a district that's only ever had one superintendent without a doctorate, and that's gonna be really hard to find. And yes, I'm being snobby about that, but I think Natick people are pretty snobby about that historically. So, does it mean that somebody with a master's can't be a superintendent? No, but I just think that's part of what the Natick culture has been. So I think it's tough. I think her credentials are great, and, well, you all know what I think. I would go for vetting her.
Dave?
I guess I was just making the point that given that the motion at that point did not say external search.
I'm just
I
gonna
was-
make sure.
Yeah, oh no, I remember, I looked at
Okay.
it. So I was just going back, assuming we went back at the July meeting to March to see what that language was to tee up the next phase of the decision. And certainly that was what, in my mind, when we voted that we'd be doing an external search, but for sure it was not part of the motion that was explicit enough to say that only an external search process would comply with that motion 100%.
It just says a search process.
Because I pushed it, because I said, if you want to put it in there, maybe you should put that in the language, and it wasn't amended, so I did push that.
I think what had happened, because there was a 7-0 vote on your motion, so the only way it could be a 7-0 vote, because you were so against it, is that it just said,
Right.
a search process. We didn't, so we haven't even.
Read us the motion.
The motion was, the Natick School Committee will begin a search process for the next superintendent schools with guidance from Mask. Alignment around interest and stakeholder input is implicit and, already reported to me, so that's another thing. So basically, we said we would begin a search process.
But even if we made a motion, we can change our mind.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, see, that's the thing, and we've learned, I mean, the most important thing we do is hire a superintendent. And we don't have to keep whatever superintendent we hire, I mean, that is the most important thing we do, is to hire a great superintendent for the district. So, as my plumber says, anything can be fixed, even putting concrete in your pipe.
Okay. Mr. Point, you know what? Matt, you have to leave.
Nobody's a master plumber.
So, I guess I'll share what I'm thinking about this, because my perspective is different and it's shorter than everybody else's.
As usual.
Was that a jazz?
No.
Same story of my life.
Yeah.
So for me, the sticking point, and I said this in July, was the use of the word search at all. Because it always felt, to me, my interpretation was this was always an identification process. And whether we identified somebody who was in the system or we used an external search to identify somebody out of the system, the goal was to identify and is to identify the next superintendent. And so while the word was starting the search process in my mind, the interpretation was identification. And so for me, that process started in July, whatever date that was. And since then, feedback, discussions, the evaluation process, working together over all of these months, has all been part of that identification process. The piece that's missing for me is the stuff that I would still love to do, is like the community forums, the focus groups, talking to the staff, all of those things. But for me, my gut tells me that the internal workflow here is where we would start. It feels, given what, in my opinion, given what I have observed and learned in this 6 months or whatever it's been, plus what's missing in terms of the community forums, tells a complete story. Whether the ending is internal or external, we'll find out once the story is told. But like, that's the piece that's missing for me. So my instinct is to go the internal direction with the, maybe these dates are right, maybe I don't know how long the mass process is, if we were to engage with them to conduct these focus groups and include the staff. And I know that Mr. Wood had suggested that he would be part of it if we wanted his help, or what. I don't know how that part is orchestrated, but I guess that's how I am feeling, being conscious of what we have and the financial impact to, like, I think a plumber can fix anything, whatever the thing is, like, I don't, if you want to put it, right, but like, if we have something that the community is happy with, and we are all happy with, then, which I think we can find out by finishing this process, then I think, in my mind, we can be done. And if we find out from the community that we aren't happy with the product, or with Anna, then, well, that's good to know too.
Right.
And then we can take the next step.
Right.
So that's, I guess, where I am standing at the moment.
I
Wait,
appreciate,
Paul had his
okay,
hand.
I hear that. I also recall, I think it was David, I'm not sure, I'd have to paraphrase, that the process of the end result of having a search would verify or counter that we currently have the best candidate in place. So it was just
Clarifying, I probably used to do the word validate.
validate, thank you, I knew that was the word.
Well,
Just didn't say it. But so my predilection and prefer, because I do not see an internal assessment as a search. Search is an external facing, looking at multiple candidates from different areas. As what we would be best served by doing, I think we can do both. We can start the assessment process and still put an ad out there just to test what candidates are interested. And within the first month, you'll be able to see, and that is a cost that the only thing requires the time to write up the job description and the cost to place it, which is mostly free because it's on.
And form a search committee.
Well, so.
There's
You
a
have
little,
to, you're gonna have to form a search committee, irrespective.
not if we do an internal, no.
So just a question about that, Paul. Would you be suggesting that we would just post it ourselves, like as we would post any other job?
That was one of the options that was
Okay,
talked
and-
about.
and so we
in
wouldn't
the-
hire a consultant?
I don't think, I mean,
Yeah.
because I'm not actually
Yeah.
suggesting doing a full external search.
Mhm.
I'm suggesting that we, as a community and board, basically put the word out there. If you're interested, send in your details. And that will test what type of caliber of
As-
of candidates are out
Well,
there.
as someone who's done, I've done recruiting, I'm probably not extensive use, I'm not saying, but I've done it in the education field. I would be, to me, it feels like if I was looking for a job, I guess what I'm saying, that feels a little, the process, and this is just me, that feels a little uncomfortable to me, that people are gonna send their applications. It doesn't, I think we either do a full-on search or we don't.
Right.
In response to that, it depends the level of what you're doing. If you're doing it at the superintendent level, if you're doing it at the university president level, or dean, provost, et cetera, like that, you know that when you send your details in, it is in confidence, it is sent from one.
No, I
place.
understand, that's not
So,
what I'm.
But it's not, it's people who are saying, hey, I'm interested in that job, I'm gonna test the waters, do I get an interview?
But the superintendent, let me just say this, what I have learned, they all talk. They all talk. Everyone knows, whatever. If we're pulling candidates and then people are like, no one gets an interview, what does that say about us? What does it say if, let's say, 2 years from now, let's just say whoever retires? We also have to think about the reputation, and I'm not saying, this is just how I'm thinking. I feel like you either do the full-blown search and legitimize that search so that candidates are interviewed, whether we hire them or not, they know they've been part of the process for future searches versus that.
With respect, having chaired the search committee for the police chief, in which we took responses from 2 assistant chiefs in a neighboring town in the same department, and neither of them knew that the other had applied for that job. And there were people internal to the police department, the
You
town.
did a full-blown search for a police chief.
We did a search, but when the first candidates who send their details in, they're vetted by the consultant.
Right.
But the fact is, that we have enough in-house experience in this town to have that first review and say whether this is a caliber and that, yes, we should go into a full.
All right, so I'm gonna play devil's advocate again, so we have to form a search committee. I'm not even talking, so we form a search committee with members of the community, we do the vetting, and then we say, thank you, we're gonna go with our internal candidate. Like, I'm really concerned about how that is played out. I would not wanna be on a committee to know that my opinion doesn't matter. To know that my time is not valuable. And that's really, because we're asking people to commit to time, we know what it's like to come to these meetings. I'm not comfortable doing that, starting a search committee without it being a legitimized, real search, because I'm not wasting anyone's time and I'm not gonna ask anyone. Donna?
I want to piggyback on Matt's comment because I thought a lot about Matt's comment that he made in July over a lot of the summer, and I thought coming tonight, I was determined I wasn't going to talk too much because I think most of you probably know what it was I wanted. But I thought over the summer that Matt's comment was right about getting input about what it is we want in a superintendent, which is why I was pushing for a description, because I think even to vet an internal candidate, we have, we have the evaluation, but it would be great to have input from us, and maybe we would go further, maybe we'd get some parents or CPAC, what is it you want to see, what are the qualifications in a superintendent, and then we have our internal candidate, and we can say, well, does she match up? Did we miss something when we were thinking about this? And I think maybe that's what you were trying to maybe direct us toward, the in part in identity kind of thing back in the summer. And
Right.
I think there was some wisdom in that, and I wonder if there's some way of like, I mean, abridging this so that we could include that in this
Well,
process.
I think one thing that, and I think some of us have sat on some of these meetings, and I think we have not synthesized that information to bring it to you, because you sat on a few, I sat on a few communities, you did and Matt did. So we've started that process with Anna. I'm not saying when Anna had her one-on-one meetings, we came in without Anna being there and started asking questions.
Right.
So we can continue that, but I think we still need to figure out what our process is going to be. Because every time that we go back to another meeting and decide, are we doing
Agreed.
internal
I
vetting
think
or
we
external?
need to do
it's-
internal or external,
Right, yeah.
agreed.
Matt?
Procedurally, for those in the room who have, when I do recruiting in my job, it's a faster engineer thing, and it's never this drawn out. I hired people on the spot, it's a little bit different. But, in the professional non-school committee opinion, if we were to hypothetically go through the internal process and decide that we wanted to do, we're gonna use Mask or whomever to host community forums and do focus groups and the survey to help us define what it is that what the community actually wants in a superintendent. If that process took, let's just using this, compile feedback and write report, so the end of October, let's say, and then the result of that report is, you know what, we need to do an external search. Keep in mind, Paul, your original point that, like, the dates might be, arbitrary. If let's say that we knew by the end of October that the internal process wasn't gonna result in what we wanted, so we start an external process at that point, is it too late if we start in November? Is there harm, I guess what I'm asking, in doing the internal part, and then if we don't like it,
Right.
starting in November without hamstringing us to go through like a full external process?
What do you think,
cut-
Julie?
Just a caveat.
I don't think it's atypical of districts to find out in December. I mean, November, December, that they need
That's
the
what I thought. I
superintendent.
thought it
And
was
just
like
from my
spring.
teaching experience.
I just don't, I'm asking about the process.
I question, I think to develop a process where we get the questions out to the constituents we want to address in 4 weeks, because we're coming up to October, is a bit ambitious. I'd say you're probably talking about the end of November, or December, by the time you get enough information, and if that's the point where.
This was my question originally about the other mass document. What I didn't see in there was how long does it typically take them, if they're doing it, to formulate, and, because maybe they have a canned, like they can churn it out this quickly, I don't know. Or if that's good.
Julie?
I could answer some of that, because they do have standard surveys that they send out to communities that we could use and that we could customize and we could add to it, like through the survey process. They have standard questions that they ask that, they gave to us for those one-on-one meetings that they would use in focus groups. Now, I don't know how to synthesize, how quickly they can do that with the focus groups and the surveys to sort of say, this is what we found. But they do have that thing. I mean, part of what these dates and this process was trying to do was to show that we need to do something.
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
we cannot keep,
sure.
we've been not doing anything. I mean, we've been trying, but since March, it's been very difficult. So this was more to say, we have a lot of work to do, and part of these documents, like, look how much work it takes to put together a search. So we need to be really committed to what we're doing and a search process, because this is no small undertaking. So that was.
And I imagine that they're gonna take direction from us. It's not like we're gonna put it in their lap and they're gonna decide who they're reaching out to and what they're doing. And I think especially where we're trying to do it on a more conservative budget. And I was only half kidding when I said we should do profile the superintendent, but that was actually a great series of inquiries into the community to figure out what we wanted in a graduate. And it wouldn't be bad to do something similar for profile. I mean, we don't have to name it that. But, we wanna make sure we hear from teachers what their priorities are in terms of leadership and, what they feel are the current strengths, which will be telling, and what are the current deficits, Likewise, we want to get as much community, parent, just other groups in town. We wanna sort of hear of those priorities and from parents. So it is almost like a profile. You know, that was a great process that the town, or that the school really conducted to figure out what it was, you know, that a profile, even the students, you know.
I
so
think it's a great name.
profile of the
Yeah.
superintendent.
I think it's a great name, I think it would be a great process, and once we've got it, we don't have to drag it out for
Well,
a
here's
long
the thing,
time.
now we're adding another process before we even
I
start.
don't think it's a
Well, it's
different
a
process,
process.
it's
We're
the
not adding
same.
But you're talking about with
I just gave
focus.
it a-
No, it's literally, it's like, cause if you think about the questions that we asked in these one-on-one meetings that we got from MASC, which they took from their superintendent search processes, it's all about what are the strengths of the district right now? What are the challenges you see in the district? What does the next superintendent need to do? What does the next superintendent need to not do? You know, so that they are those questions that will answer that question and that will tell us, I think, if we have the right person in place right now.
So it's
It's the same
let me,
I think it's the same thing.
So you're, oh, Mary Ann?
Just back to the November, you're looking at the timeline for the internal, right? And